So nice to see you. That was my impression of a flower. Because they're still in our time frames, I don't think we usually think of them that way. But maybe if your brain is wired a little different, I think they're doing that more than you think. So I'd like to talk a little bit about flowers this morning, but before I do, I was just thinking, there's a good chance what I say this morning won't make any sense. And I want to encourage you to not be too worried about it. Oftentimes in the teaching comes in like a very clear kind of explanation, and we can take the explanation and we can look at our lives. We can use the explanation as a lens or as a suggestion of how to do things, and we can make some shifts and explore something. And that's one variety of teaching. That's a wonderful kind of teaching, but it's not the only kind of teaching. And there's also kind of teaching which is more like an image. It's more like just me sharing my heart. In this case, I'm giving the teaching, so just sharing my heart in a way that if you think of it more of like just something that you might see, that like a painting or something, you don't have to understand it, but it might be important to you in some way, or it might not. It's not, it's not really the point. We're not trying to extract some meaning or explanation, but just to stay with it. And I know there'll be some eyes roll when I say this, but I'm going to tell my new favorite joke, which is, why can't you see the elephants hiding in the trees?
Why?
Because they're really good at it. So, it's stupid. I love that joke. But if you think about it, they're really good at it, right? Like, that's it, And then it's just funny because I said it at lunch the other day, and someone said, I thought it was a word game or something. Like we want to pull more meaning out of it, right? Like there's got to be something more to it than that. But that's what makes the joke my favorite, is there isn't anything else there. Just elephants are good at hiding in trees, or these elephants are good at hiding in trees. So the Dharma can be that way. There's just something that's given to us, which is just very direct. And then it's best for us to not try to make too much out of it in terms of extracting meaning, but to stay with what's present. And I would make the argument that actually this is a skill that is very important for living of spiritual life. That the world is not there to give us a map and a specificity of a construct of meaning. It is there to present us with an invitation that is continual and fabulous. And as soon as we nail it down, there's something that is lost. And this is probably the reason that the world's so slippery. This is probably the reason that this great luminous body of the Buddha that we experience as trees and grass and flowers and other people and cars and everything, why it's so slippery, because it's teaching us all the time. Sometimes we say that the whole world is a sutra that is just continually chanted. And so what is it to hear that? What is it to live in relationship with that, with there being meaning all around, but the meaning to not have to be explainable? And that my job is to find a relationship with all of those things, to know something through that deep relationality with the teaching, which is a little bit different than owning it as an explanation. Although sometimes that's really helpful. Flowers. I think flowers are particularly suited to this type of teaching. We had a spring that was filled with flowers with our head student Shanae's teaching from the flower ornament scripture, which is just like mandala of flower upon flower upon flower upon flower. You read one paragraph of the flower ornament scripture and your brain just kind of short circuits, and oftentimes we experience that as frustrating. But there's another way you can experience it. It's just like so cool. It's just like boop, 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 and it all opens up. The Lotus Sutra is another place where flowers are referred to very directly. All throughout the tradition, actually, flowers are showing up before the Buddha preaches. In almost all of the Mahayana sutras, there is a shaking of the earth. There is flowers falling down from the heavens. Mandarava flowers usually are the predominant ones, and they're covering everything. Mara, the deceiver, his great assault on the Buddha when he took his seat underneath the Bodhi tree, and he hurled all manner of weapons at the Buddha, the armies of delusion, hurling all these weapons, and they turn into flowers in the air, and they surround the Buddha. So anyway, it's showing up all over the place if you read Buddhist teachings. Flowers are beautiful. I think flowers are intoxicating. And usually we don't think of intoxication as a positive thing in Buddhism, at least, but they lure us in. There's some power in the desire of color. They're like fire. They're like the fire of living. I think a few months ago I was saying I feel like they're the imagination of plants. It's kind of throwing color into the air, this hopeful move, which is a process of intoxication, but also of deep relation and communication, which gives birth to seed, which fruit and seed, which then keeps the world in flowers. They're fleeting. In fact, if they weren't fleeting, it wouldn't be flowers. They couldn't do what flowers do. They're strange. Like, I think flowers are really beautiful, and mostly I just go, oh, wow, they're really beautiful. Get up close and look at a flower. That's some weird stuff. Like, it's very strange. I one time had a good fortune to go to a exhibit of Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings. I was in San Francisco, and I basically have not gone to see anybody's paintings, okay? So, but we were there, and it's like, there's art museum, and oh, great, I'm so excited. And we went, but I was like, Georgia O'Keeffe, and it's big flowers, whatever. And like, oh my gosh, no. I mean, wow. Like, she could, the only way I can understand it is that she knew that these were portals beyond the confinements of ignorant self. And she knew that so clearly that these paintings could be her expression. You know, really, really mesmerizing. Although I did, most of the time, I tried to get away from it, but there's this little painting about this big, it's called Well in the Woods. It's kind of an abstract painting. And it just swallowed me. And then I would be looking around it, and I'd find myself back in front of it. My wife would be looking for me, and she would find me. I tried to buy a print or something of it. I actually found one, but I couldn't do it because, you know, the magic of something that is the actual painting is just, you can't capture it. There's no way. And so I looked at it, and I always felt a little disappointed. So I just hold that well in my heart. I can't see it, but I can feel it. Right? It's a kind of flower. When I was in Japan several years ago, I learned about flowers as celebration when it was a year after the great earthquake and tsunami in northern Japan, which is where I spent most of my time in Japan. My teacher's temple's there, my wife's family is from there, and they were very close to, the tsunami or tidal wave came just within a couple kilometers of my wife's home, her parents' home, and, you know, unbelievable destruction. So many people died. And most they couldn't find, you know, they were just swallowed by the sea. And so when I had visited the summer, that was in the spring, and when I visited the summer right after that, things were so heavy and the spirits everywhere. You can just feel that. And there was so much, it was really wonderful in the vocation of a priest to see how priests were stepping up in that environment to just do constant sutra recitation and constant offerings of flowers and other things in relationship to this situation and to all of these spirits which were lost and were trying to find their way. So that was the first summer, and then I was away for a whole year, and then the next summer I came back in the summertime, and we were there, and the year before they had canceled the big firework display in Sendai, which, because they needed to raise money to help people, and this fireworks display, I don't know if you knew this, was very expensive. And so they will raise money throughout, like June and July, like around town, you know, the people with the cans put money in, and businesses donate tons of money anyway. So this year after, they decided to do it. And I remember being on the veranda of my aunt's house, kind of condominium where we would watch the fireworks from. And as the fireworks went up, you could feel the joy and sorrow of the whole town. You know, it's like millions of people, and you could just feel it everywhere. In Japanese, fireworks are called hanabi, which means a flower fire. And it was just like that. These flowers in the sky, and everyone's heart just came out. And like my aunt, who I'd never seen cry before, she's just crying. Everyone knew that it was like, here is something fleeting, here is something colorful, here is something deeply alive, and it is our life. And I don't even want to say, part of me says, and it continues, but that wasn't even it. It doesn't continue. It's just right now. And everyone there knew that. And there's a great transformation, a possibility that was known in that moment. Flowers have this quality. Now, I want to talk about a very particular kind of flower, sky flowers, which is a term that is used all the way back into Sanskrit writings. And Dogen Zenji, the founder of our school, has a fascicle on flowers called Sky Flowers. If you like flowers, I highly recommend reading this. You won't understand it if you're lucky. If you understand it, I'm sorry. Anyway, this one I just printed off the internet. This is a nice translation by there's a Soto Zen translation project, and this was published in something called, I think they call it the Dharma Eye, which is like a newsletter that will come out a few times a year. So anyway, if you're interested in that, you can find it there. It's pretty easy. And he entitles this, Kuge is what it is in Japanese, sky flowers, and he references this old word. And this word is not a particularly positive word. It's traditionally used as a kind of description of delusion, that it's referring to the phenomena of having some kind of disease of the eye. And when you have this kind of disease in the eye, like flashes of light or little things will appear in your eye. Or, my experience of this is like you staring at the, you ever just like look at the sun? I don't know on purpose. And then you go, whoa, like that. And then there's all these lights, Apparently some people do that for spiritual practice, but we'll talk about that right now. So that kind of thing, like these lights that appear in your eye, but there's nothing actually there. And so sky flower was used to refer to this, and then often became a kind of a term to talk about things that we see and we think they're real, but they're not, like a permanently abiding self. We think that we are individual beings, and that's called a sky flower, right? It's a flower, but it's also not really true. It's empty. Sky in Chinese, the character for sky also means empty. So there's always a play. If you hear some references to the sky, it's also some play on words with emptiness, which is different than nothingness. Emptiness is, you could say, the indivisibility of everythingness. And everything is a representative of that everythingness. And a flower is a great example of that, right? Like there's a whole universe, and here there's this flower. That's pretty weird. So this original meaning of sky flower, usually talked about as deluded perception. Dogen, in a wonderful Dogen way, which he does with almost everything, he is going to give the positive expression of sky flower. He's going to say, if you think that sky flower is a problem, then you're kind of missing the point. And in this text, there's a lot in there. I'm not teaching directly from this, but pulling a few things from it. He has this quote from the Buddha in the Shurangama Sutra, where the Buddha says, if the disease of cloudiness is removed, the flowers disappear from the sky. So he's talking about cloudiness in the eye. He says, if the cloudiness of the eye disappears, then these flowers in the sky will disappear. Now, one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because I think we oftentimes are thinking this way about spiritual practice, particularly meditation. We think if we could remove the cloudiness, whatever version of cloudiness you prefer, you'll think if I could remove that, then there would be the bright openness of the sky. Right? Those diversions, those delusions would disappear. And so we understand the meaning of a quote like this from the Buddha, that if the cloudiness disappears, then these sky flowers will disappear, as an instruction to rid ourselves of the sky flowers and to experience the truth of the sky. But while that is true in some contexts, like we are so wound up, just wound tight. And so a little bit of that is probably actually good. Sit down and be like, stop obsessing over stuff, right? So, but a little goes a long way. You very quickly can turn that way of thinking into kind of self, like trying to undercut yourself and undercut experience all the time. And actually becomes a kind of like violence towards experience, to always be thinking of it as delusional and trying to undercut it in some way. And furthermore, we make the arrogant mistake of thinking that we have grasped the sky, thinking we would know what the sky would be like if I had let go of these delusions, that it would be this bright and open thing with nothing in it at all. That kind of misunderstanding leads to a certain sort of disrespect for the awakening of flowers, which is the awakening of our heart. Sky, emptiness, flowers, I, they're all one. The I is not over here looking into a sky. The I is the sky. You know, the emptiness of your, not, I mean, you know, I oftentimes reference the pupil. I just think that's so cool. It's a hole, guys. Right? You know, it looks like a black dot, but it's a hole. It's like a hole that light goes through. But it doesn't just go through the pupil. It goes through the pupil of your being. It goes through the whole of your being, which we mindlessly try to fill because we can't stand the freedom of this total openness of being. That everything we see goes all the way through us. We usually say in one ear, out the other, you know, but maybe it's like in the eye and down through into the soul of the universe. It's a little more poetic. Yeah. So the skies, these flowers, these eyes, we can't separate them so easily and think that if the eye could just get rid of the clouds, then the sky wouldn't have the clouds, and then there wouldn't be any problems, because there wouldn't be anything. There not being anything is a kind of problem, right? Now, one of the most famous stories in the Zen tradition comes from when Shakyamuni Buddha, towards the end of his life, at one of the daily assemblies. So in the morning, the assembly of monastics, or actually they're mendicants, that were together, they would go out into the towns for their alms rounds, and they would receive food, and they would come back together, they would eat the food, and then they would wash up and take a little rest, and then the Buddha would, there's kind of a stone, and the Buddha would take his place there on the stone, and then would give a teaching. And the assembly of the mendicants would be there, and then other people who weren't mendicants would come as well. So when you read in the sutras about assemblies of beings there to hear the Buddha teaching, that happened in a kind of what we normally say actual way, which seems very fishy to me. But there were humans a couple thousand years ago that were doing that. I think there were other things there too, but we don't have to talk about that too much. But there were definitely humans that were mendicants, and there were humans that weren't mendicants who came, and then all of the centaurs and dragon kings and other things you read about in the sutras. I'll leave that up to you. So you can imagine this situation. They're all there together. And on this day, the Buddha doesn't say anything. I sometimes imagine he was tired. He's doing this every day. And I think, this day, maybe he's just like, anyway, who knows? But he picks up a flower and he turns it between his thumb and his finger like this. He twirls it a bit. And in some versions, it said that Mahakashapa smiled. And in other versions, it says Mahakashapa blinked his eyes. And then the Buddha says, Mahakashapa, I now entrust to you the Shobo Genzo Neham Myoshin, which means the treasury of the true Dharma eye, the wondrous mind of Nirvana. And that was it. And this is said to be the first transmission between the Buddha and his close disciple Mahakashapa. And Mahakashapa, who's here on our altar to the left of the Buddha, becomes the first ancestor. So the Buddha is a Buddha. Mahakashapa's not a Buddha. He's an ancestor. He's a bodhisattva ancestor. And he's going to keep the wheel of Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching rolling in the world, right? As many, many people are. But he has a special responsibility as the lineage, as the first in the lineage after Shakyamuni Buddha. So this is a beautiful image. I think a lot about this story these days because my grandson Kai loves flowers. And he's kind of a flower. He used to just like love them in a way that they stayed intact, and now he loves them. He's like the psycho killer of flowers. He picks any flowers and he pulls them apart and puts them in little boxes and things like that. But usually before he does that, he goes like this, and he'll twirl it in his hand a couple of times like this before he dismembers it. And so I'm oftentimes reminded of that when I see him. There's something about a flower turning. There's something, it depends on the flower. Some are more that way than others. Iris is not so much, but most flowers have that. What's it called? A calyx? Calyx? Yeah, that, right in the center. And so there's something about turning there, and certainly the image of the lotus in Buddhism, turning, and this being the teaching of the Buddha. It's really beautiful. Now, a dried-eyed practitioner, somebody who is steeped in prajna, steeped in the teachings of emptiness, would say, well, it doesn't have to be a flower. The Buddha could have picked up a banana, you know, and held it like this. And Mahakashapa maybe would go, and then he would say, oh, I have entrusted the mind to you. That could have totally been possible, right? It didn't have to be a flower. It didn't have to be a flower. It could be anything. Everything is the total mind of awakening. But it wasn't. And this is my beef with the dried-eyed practitioner. It wasn't a banana. It wasn't a rock. It was a flower. It reminds me of an article I read a long time ago about some of the oldest graves that they found, Neanderthal graves in northern Iraq, in a cave there. 62,000 years old, they estimate. One of these graves filled with ancient pollen. They know that this person had flowers covering them before they buried them. And there's others there, not all of them have flowers, but that one does. If you read into it more, some archaeologists argue about it, but that's not our business. Think about that, flowers. I was just in Japan a few weeks ago for the funeral of my teacher, Rutsugen Joshin Daiyosho, whose photo's here to the side, the founder of this temple. That's why our name is Buddha Eye Temple, because his name is Buddha Eye, pure faith. And before we carried him to the crematorium, we filled his casket with flowers. There's a custom in Japan. Before we took our daughter to the crematorium, we covered her body in flowers. Sunflowers. Sunflowers. And this continues. The Buddha didn't pick up a banana. He picked up a flower. Now, Dogen says something very interesting about these sky flowers. He says that the sky flowers arise from earth. Actually, it's an ancestor he quotes who says, sky flowers arise from earth. The entire nation has no gate through which to buy them. It's a very curious statement. Now, it's originally in Chinese. This one's kind of hard to translate in a way that kind of, it seems very clunky in English. Sky flowers arise from earth. The entire nation, the whole land, everyone, has no gate through which to buy them. Some translators will say no place to buy them. There's no way to buy them. There's no situation in which they can be bought. It's a very curious thing. First to say that sky flowers arise from the earth. How would it be that sky flowers arise from the earth? Aren't they just things that are floating in the sky? That's the image of the sky flower, right? It's just up in space. Yeah. But think about it. What isn't space? Would someone just slide that window shut? Yeah. Sometimes I have a hard time following my own mind, even when it's I'm not listening to the kids. I have this disability. I can't not listen to speech. And I'm working on it, but more meditation. Anyway, but if you look around at the earth, what if that is not sky? Right? Like we think the earth is solid. In the same way we make a mistake, like we know what the sky is. Like we say, oh, it's just open, this is sky. It gets filled with things, clouds and stars and birds and telephone wires and tree branches and all that kind of stuff fills up the sky. But I know what the sky is. It's the thing that is like the receptacle of all of that, right? Baloney. The sky is completely beyond your grasp. And you reference it with a word, but we have no ability to grasp that. So actually all the clouds and the trees and the birds and the airplanes and everything, they reveal the sky to us. That's the only way we could even know about a sky, is through all of those things. The same thing of the earth. We think we know what the earth is. Oh yeah, earth. It's not the sky, it's the earth. Grounded. We like to say that. We need more grounding. But as you ground yourself, what you'll find is there's nothing there except for space, right? It also is ungraspable. It is moment after moment. It is, stamen. Is that right? The little thing inside the, yeah. Stamen after stamen, right? Everywhere. And so Dogen, quoting this ancestor, whose name I can't remember right now, he's calling our attention to this. Sky flowers are not something that's in what you imagine to be the sky. Sky flowers arise from the earth. They arise from the materiality. They are not separate, and they appear in your eye. And then he says, the entire nation has no gate through which to buy. Now, on one side of this, I think oftentimes Dogen's going to like flip the meaning on it, but if you're studying Dogen, don't get too tricked by him, because oftentimes you think like I should banish the first meaning that makes sense to me because Dogen said that's not what it is, and then you lose something because the first meaning is important here. Who could buy flowers? Where could you do that? Where could this be a transaction? Where could this be you leveraging your force against the world? Even if you go to the Saturday market and buy beautiful flowers, isn't it kind of a farce? Do you ever get that way when you buy things? I'm often just like, you want some of these? Like you have some money and it's just a joke almost, and then you get these flowers and it's as if the person grew them. They grew the flowers. They didn't grow the flowers grew themselves. And the person hung out with them and, made sure that they had a decent life so that they could bloom, and then they could cut them off and brought them to you, right? So in one level of this meaning, we can just see, it's like, there's no buying. What are you talking about? We do almost nothing. We produce lots of CO2. just breathing, besides burning all the fossil fuels and stuff. But we do very, very little, And here we are, growing the flowers. So you can read it that way, which I like. There's no place. But then Dogen says, no, that's not how it is. Okay? He says, it took me a while to translate this, but I just love it. He says, it is not that throughout the nation that no one buys flowers. It is just that buying has no gate. Okay? So he first says, yeah, of course we're buying flowers all the time. Yeah, all kinds of. But what are we doing there? What are we doing in buying the flowers? What are we doing in encountering the flower? What are we doing in being intoxicated by the flower and letting it grab our attention? Now, that's the kind of buying, right? We're spending our attention on encountering this flower. And he says, it's not that we don't buy them. Of course we buy them. It's just that the buying is the buying of no gate. Or you could say, the buying is the buying of the gate of no, which is the gate of like, it's all right here. It's all right. This flower. It is not a gate of explanation. It's not a gate of getting something. It's not a gate of any of that. There's just the entirety of this flowerness. And so of course we buy that. Of course the intoxication, of course the delusion is 100% important. Because how would our attention be drawn into this miraculous gate of no? Or drawn to this place where we could care about something? And this gets back to the great, where we could care about something enough that its dissolution matters to us. Think about that for a second. We love each other knowing that that will go away, that we will dissolve in each other's arms. A flower teaches us something about that. That is the place where attention becomes truly alive. It's not the place to say, well, that's going to go away, so let me put it aside. It's not the real thing, right? Because it's temporary. And this is what the Buddha woke up to. The temporariness is not a pain. It's not a suffering by definition. The temporariness, the impermanence of things is the very color of our own heart and experience and our living. We have a few minutes for questions or comments or rebuttals, or we could just have cookies. Hi.
I love them.
Yeah.
And they draw me in a way that I think like flowers do. Because they bloom nowhere and they disappear into nowhere. And so often I try to share that with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I start telling stories
Mm-hmm.
and collaborating with things. I've come in so hard just to love them.
Because they're free, and that's a big challenge to our own freedom, which we avoid in so many ways. So a story is not a problem, though. A story is also the freedom. So there's a cloud, and then there's a story about a cloud. But if we hate the story, then in a way, the freedom of the cloud disappears. But sometimes we don't want a story, so you can tell your friend to shut up. I mean, what I hear. Yeah.
Flowers are part of offering and interacting with your altar and the altar spaces.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that practice a little bit?
Yeah. So the kind of traditional 5 offerings that are made, this goes, way back in not only in Buddhism, but just kind of like, I would say, Asian Buddhist ecosystem. If you think about the spiritual life of, there's kind of different ecosystems. There might be like a European ecosystem. There's a South Asian ecosystem that then spread out over East Asia and everywhere. And the traditional one would be flowers, incense, light, food, and drink. So those are the 5. Now, in some traditions, particularly like in the Tibetan tradition, they have like different, maybe like 9 offerings, and so there's different ones. But in our tradition, those are the central ones, and they all have their own. They can have their own symbolism as well as just their matter of fact as kind of offering. And oftentimes, flowers are symbolic of the compassion of the Dharma. So the Dharma, as it unfolds in the world, it blooms as a compassionate response to things. And this is why, like on this altar here, we have 2 of each thing. It's like there's 2 candles, 2 sets of flowers, 2 offerings of food, and all those things. But on smaller altars, it's very common to have just 1 candle and 1 flower. You always put the candle on the Buddha's left, not your left. If you think about whatever the Buddha or Bodhisattva is their left, that's always a candle. And on the right is the flowers. And that's because the candle symbolizes wisdom, and the flower symbolizes compassion. And so there's this kind of flowering. So you'll see that's very, in this tradition, that's always consistent throughout everything. And for those of you who do flowers at the temple, it's like a lot of work, but it's also, you get this feeling for what that adornment is about. Because another thing in making the offerings is the offerings are a beauty for the Buddha or the ancestor or the Bodhisattva to enjoy, but they also then become an adornment of their body. And so the flowers are like an expression of that compassion that we bring to the altar, so that that color can be irradiating. I really encourage people. I grew up in a house where we had lots of flowers. My parents really loved to grow flowers, and my dad particularly liked dahlias, and he grew lots of dahlias, and so we always had lots of flowers inside when it was flower season. Well, my parents would never buy flowers. In Japan, it's more common to buy flowers as well as to grow them yourself. And so then I learned over time what a difference is. My wife will just buy like a couple flowers in the wintertime, and put them on the table, and it's like the whole world changes a bit there. Yeah. And then of course on the altar of your house is your table.
I suppose people have noticed, but it's a phenomenon. It's been phenomenal booming. I don't know what caused it, maybe all the rain and then one.
Yeah.
But my roses, who like four of them would have 1 stem and maybe 1 bud, maybe 2.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are 5.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as though I don't know if people experience this, but there's this fullness in town. The trees are almost touching.
Yeah.
The flowers have been, I don't know, spectacular or something like that.
The earth is trying to bring balance to our shenanigans, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Balance to our shenanigans. Yeah.
Anyway, it's a celebration.
Yeah.
It seems to me this one.
Ojo-san,
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember this short story that you told, but it's about Azusa and using part of when you didn't have a lot of money and deciding to use some of your money to buy flowers.
Yeah.
Can you share
That was
again?
just
It
her
very-
commitment. I mean, when our oldest daughter Anzu was a baby, and we lived in Portland, and we were pretty, on the edge. We're never in trouble. We had family that could help us when we needed it and that kind of thing. But we're just pretty, luckily, hopefully, you had at least a part of your life where you get to live right in that place. That's a very good place to live. and you're just kind of getting by. And that really, what I really remember about it was I couldn't believe that she was going to spend money on buying flowers when we didn't have any. And when I kind of brought it up, luckily I didn't bring it up in that kind of, what the hell are you doing sort of way. I brought it up and I'm like, oh, wow, really? She just looked at me like, what are you talking about? What? This is a necessity of, we bought beans. we would get some flowers. She was always very careful to pick just a couple, and so it wasn't too much. But that became really consistent in my life. I'm so thankful to her for that, because I would have been much more likely to be like, well, that's a extravagance, or that's something extra, or that's something that just adorns the sky. I want to get to the sky. That's why I talk about these things, because it's my own delusion that reminding myself that hopefully it's good for you too. Hi.
Maybe slightly unrelated or related topic.
Yeah.
But I wondered if you garden, is that true?
Say again?
You garden,
Not so much. I have garden.
but maybe someone else.
Mhm.
What do you do with the slugs?
Oh yeah. One time I gave him beer. But I'm not sure. It didn't work very well. But I think it's a real conundrum when you're doing a lot, whether it's slugs or snails or deer or squirrels, or we have these possums in our backyard. They're so weird. They're like white ghost things that come out, and they dig up. Also, will plant some. She's got some peppers and some other things, and they come and dig them up, not because they want the plant, but there's grubs underneath or something apparently. And so every morning you get up and they're all dug up, and it's just like, what are you gonna do? So I don't have an answer of what to do, but actually, I think it's so important for us. It's the same way as when say this, like living in community, like we all do here. We come together and we're a community at Buddha Temple, and sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes things are hard. Sometimes somebody gets off balance and we don't know how to help them, or sometimes someone's in a lot of pain and other people can't see it, and then we just kind of go on, and then we find out later that that's happening. There's all kinds of like intrusions onto our idea of what growing the fruit or vegetables of the community would be, and I think that's so important for us, because we live in our delusion that we know what the community is, or we know what the garden is, or we know what's right or wrong, and then these slugs show up and they go like, oh yeah, and now we have a challenge about how to harmonize. But if we just say, well, oh yeah, these are for slugs too, then they probably just eat everything, and so that's not exactly option either. It just destroys everything. So we're right there in that conundrum of what to do, and I think that's very good for us. When I did garden, I grew a lot of vegetables for a number of years. I would just go back and forth. Sometimes I hack them in half and toss them over the fence, and sometimes I just be like, oh yeah, they need to eat too, and that kind of everything in between, and probably moment to moment. In the old mendicant communities, there's many things that the monks were not allowed to do. Basically, they're not supposed to work, right? So, but they particularly weren't allowed to till soil, because if they tilled soil, it was very easy to kill things while they were tilling soil. But the monks still had to eat. So other people tilled the soil, and then they would offer the food. And that kind of division was a way to work with that problem, that some people would remain pure by not killing, and some people would take the karma of killing, and then they would they would make offerings to the pure assembly to help overcome the karma that they accrued from killing. And so there was this kind of circle. And a lot of people look at that and they go, well, that's not quite right. Those monks are just living off of other people's karma or whatever. And yeah, sure, I think it's worthy of criticism. But there's also something else inside of it, which those pure assembly and those farmers are all right in here too. And so the big question in that is, what do we make the offering to? We are going to do some killing in one way or another, consciously or not. And with what we achieve through that killing, with what power we gain through that killing, whether that's vegetables or whatever, what do we do with it? And to me, that becomes very informative to how it is that we treat the things that help grow that food, for example. How we treat the slugs isn't just like a moral question of, is it okay to kill slugs or not okay to kill slugs? It's a moral question about, what do we do with vegetables? And if we think about what we're doing with vegetables, the way that we treat the slugs comes into that. Anyway, that might be a complex avoiding of the question.